Welcome to the Soul Tree Project. If you've been enjoying the content put out on this channel, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss anything. This is part 2 of a Jungian analysis of Lord of the Rings. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, scroll through my recent videos or go to my channel playlists and click on the Lord of the Rings. The Soul Tree Project presents Part 2, Shadow Integration, Gandalf and the Hobbits. As the Hobbits are about to be cast out of the Shire's unconscious paradise, it's also a time where they aren't yet conscious of their shadow and therefore haven't integrated shadow dynamics into their lives.
What are you doing?
Tomatoes, sausages, nice crispy bacon.
We saved some for you, Mr. Frodo.
Put it out, you fools! Put it out!
That's nice.
Shadow dynamics are often repressed in order to maintain the ideal status quo in one's life. To illustrate the onset of the Hobbit's shadow integration, it is beneficial to understand Gandalf and his relationship with the Hobbits. When Gandalf arrives at the Shire, he could be considered as the archetype of the wise old man and an image of the self, or at least a doorway into the self. Note that Jung's meaning of the self is not what is meant by many who use the term today as a word for the ego. The self is rather a totality of parts that generates movement towards consciousness and wholeness, a central guiding system. Guidance towards actualization of the self sometimes speak in images of the wise old man, showing one what they must still consider on their quest for wholeness. The archetypal image of the wise old man often shows up in stories when insight, understanding, good advice, determination, etc. are needed but cannot be mustered on one's own resources. Gandalf elucidates that clarity and guides the beginning of the quest to destroy the ring. He first keenly catches on to Bilbo's evil ring, the Ring of Power, and he eventually uncovers the full nature of its evil. He then helps devise a plan to deal with the situation. This represents the ability of the self, the higher self, or a wise self-image, to illuminate the truth in circumstances where it is camouflaged.
It cannot be. Forgive me. I mistook you for Saruman.
I am Saruman. Rather Saruman as he should have been.
Jung's concept of enantiodromia fits nicely here, as above meets below, wizard and hobbit. Enantiodromia, as it refers to the emergence of the unconscious opposite in the course of time, plays itself out with Gandalf and the hobbits. The extreme unconsciousness of the hobbits draws Gandalf into the Shire as his opposite, and Gandalf lures the hobbits out into the adventure as their opposite. Gandalf has notably encountered evil innumerable times at this point, and is the clear compensatory opposite of normal hobbit life. Hobbits are seemingly quite harmless, although grumpy at times, and unconscious creatures by nature. They also happen to live in underground structures, symbolizing the unconscious. Gandalf, in his past voluntary encounters with evil, has had to integrate his own shadow, and is by opposition very conscious in general. His ability to be a violent threat in any given situation, and to have the discipline to use that power only for good, indicates a conscious and benevolent integration of shadow aggression. Regarding the integration of shadow impulses, Edward Whitmont remarked, "The shadow has to have its place in legitimate expression, somehow, sometime, somewhere, by consciously confronting it, we have a choice of when, how, and where we may allow expression to its tendencies in a constructive context. Gandalf's conscious confrontation with the shadow allows him to use that impulse for benevolent purposes rather than being controlled by it. When Gandalf decides to confront Bilbo about giving up the evil ring, Bilbo's unconscious shadow aggression is displayed. In Jung's analytical terms, Bilbo is in a complex, meaning an indicator of the divisibility or dissociability of the psyche, and of the relative independence of the fragments of the psyche. In more conclusive terms, Bilbo is at odds with himself. Fragmented aspects of his personality are agitated within the tension of irreconcilable opposites. The oppositional tension sounds like, I want the ring desperately, yet I know I need to give it up. The polarity of desperate desire takes its last stand in Bilbo. Through the fissures of unconscious tension spills forth an uncharacteristically rude and possessive behavior. Bilbo projects blame onto Gandalf and exclaims,
You want it for yourself!
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I am not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you. All your long years, we've been friends. Trust me, as you once did. Let it go.
You're right, Gandalf.
Mary Louise von France provides insight into predicaments such as Bilbo's, stating, if you feel an overwhelming rage coming up in you when a friend reproaches you about a fault, you can be fairly sure at this point that you will find a part of your shadow of which you are unconscious. The shadow confrontation between Gandalf and Bilbo cannot be understated from an analytical perspective. The tension of opposites is at play in another way here as well. Gandalf's integrated shadow dynamics is in opposition to Bilbo's unconscious and fragmented shadow dynamics. The scene is beautifully constructed to show a masterful example of true shadow integration. Gandalf displays a meticulous and graceful control over his aggression and utilizes his love all within the same rhythmic movement. The darkening of the room and booming voice fades into lightning love. His integrated shadow aggression and coalition with loving regard disarms Bilbo's unconscious tirade. Von France provides insight into the importance of learning to utilize the shadow as Gandalf does. The shadow usually contains values that are needed by consciousness, but that exist in a form that make it difficult to integrate them into one's life. Aggression is an archaic psycho-emotional circuit and very difficult to harness. One can see how Gandalf's managed this feat in his masterful response to Bilbo. Gandalf has displayed an alchemical union of opposites within himself, aggression and love. Jung comments on the importance of alchemical union, stating, "The problem of opposites, called up by the shadow, plays a great, indeed the decisive role in alchemy, since it leads in the ultimate phase of the work to the union of opposites." To extrapolate most clearly, the ability to utilize and integrate the shadow into consciousness is a healing faculty and a mark of the self's drive towards wholeness. Murray Stein explains, the emergence of unity symbols and of integrative movements in the psychic system generally are marks of the action of the self archetype. The self's task seems to be to hold the psychic system together and keep it in balance. Its goal is unity. In conscious recognition and acceptance of the shadow, the self is sustained and accomplishes unity. Gandalf appears as the self, or at least the precursor to the self, and as such displays a full range of characteristics, including carefully acknowledged shadow impulses. The shadow dynamics in The Lord of the Rings are further represented in the tension of the imagistic and archetypal trajectory of the story. In order to destroy the Ring of Power, the protagonist must move directly into the heart of evil itself, Mordor and Mount Doom, for it can only be destroyed from whence it was created. The psychological interpretation is that one cannot deal with the problem of the shadow by avoiding it, but only by facing it directly. No progress will take place until the shadow is directly confronted. In this way, the journey to destroy the ring is the burden of awakening the psyche and becoming more conscious.
Sorry for everything.
Let's get you out of here.
It's too late. It's over. They've taken it. Sam, they took the ring.
Begging your pardon, but they haven't. I thought I'd lost you, so I took it. Only for safekeeping.
Give it to me. Give me the ring, Sam. Sam. Give me the ring.
Coming soon. Part 3. The Ring of Power as a Symbol.